The idea behind the show is simply asking guests what they would tell a stranger on a plane if they were sitting next to them and the stranger asked them for advice.
The scenery is passing very fast, but the seer is constant. The one who's seeing is the same.
Let me appreciate you for asking a question that I haven't been asked after 2,500 or so interviews over the years.
Is you have to drop the ego, which is everyone's greatest obstacle.
In 2008, Grant and I had been married for 4 years. I was pregnant with my first child. The economy was collapsing, and we were on the verge of losing everything financially.
First and foremost, excited to be back with the latest edition of the show. Excited to have a new guest with us on this show. She's doing this guest. I've interviewed her before, so I know this is going to be an absolute treat. And with this new show, as I told her off air, and I tell you guys almost each episode, it's a short form show. That's why we do a bio off the top, because I know we only have 4 or 5 questions that we can jump into. And it's why I like to go into deep questions, which sometimes scares the guests. But when I say deep questions, I just mean questions that bring us to a deeper place than just kind of like, what's your favorite color? So Cynthia Garcia, so excited to have you here today. And when I say I want to jump in deep, I want to jump in to this idea of this big word that we hear of often called legacy. And so let me ask you first and foremost, when I say the word legacy, what does that mean to you?
Gosh, it's such a big word. And I'll tell you, it's something that I have been thinking about lately, but I also don't invest too much in it. So I'll explain a little bit more about that. I am so focused on being here now, as my late mentor Ram Dass would say, and just really being present to everything that's happening right in front of me. So whether that is being present with my family, my daughter, showing up and serving in the way that I know that I can, or what have you. I don't get too caught up in this idea of legacy, because I feel like if you live in the here and now and you do it right, the legacy takes care of itself. Now, sure, we'd all like to be remembered for the wisdom that we brought to the world, or maybe the impact or the change that we created in people's lives. And I'm certainly no different. Like, I very much am on a mission to help people understand that everything is possible. You can live the life that you want, regardless of where you came from or what you've been through. So that is what it is. So I feel like if I focus on doing that work and doing it well, that the rest of it, the legacy part, will come. It'll take care of itself. So yeah, it is something that I'm hearing a lot of people talk about, and I'm making a conscious effort not to get too caught up in it. If that makes sense?
It totally does. And
Yeah.
I shared this earlier today with somebody, but I've been getting a different answer lately than I used to get. So I'm getting a lot of people saying they don't get caught up in this idea of legacy, whereas before it was always right away people were jumped to what legacy meant to them. Like, this is why legacy is important. And now I'm hearing this kind of opposite scenario. So for instance, I had Joe Vitale from The Secret on recently, and he said, I don't give a darn about legacy, Corey. He said, people need my help right now, today.
Right.
Not in the future. And so I thought that was neat. And then Dr. Greg Reed, we just had on, and he said that he did this test one time in a room. And I thought this was powerful to talk about how sometimes we probably think more about our legacy, like more about what we're going to mean to the world when we're gone, than maybe sometimes it will. And so that maybe is a reason to focus on the now. But he said he did this experiment where he got all these people stand up in a room, and he said, sit down if you don't know your father's name. And of course, most people stayed standing. Then he said, sit down if you don't know your grandfather's name. And then he lost maybe like 10%. Then he said, sit down if you don't know your great-grandfather's name. And then he lost maybe another 20. But then he said, sit down if you don't know your great-great-grandfather's name. And he said there was only like 4 people left standing up at a room of like hundreds of people.
Wow.
And he said, so if you don't even know your great-great-grandfather's first name, then really is this idea that you'll be remembered in 300 years realistic versus focusing on what you can do now to change the world? So it's interesting. I'm seeing these unique answers now.
No, I think it is interesting. And do you think that it's this idea of legacy? Do you think that there's a certain amount of ego that plays into that? I feel like I do. And I just wonder what your take is on that. Like, I'd rather focus on the people that I can serve as opposed to me and my name being around, hundreds or thousands of years from now. Like, do you think it's a bit egoic?
I think so. And, even myself, when I think every now and then, will this matter in whatever amount of years? But thinking about, I hope this will matter in whatever amount of years. I think sometimes I forget that, so this is a wake up to me. So yes, I think there's an ego side involved, and
Uh-huh.
at the same time, it's a wake up to me whenever I realize like how little we remember. Like when you look at like who's remembered now from 400 years ago, and I mean there's some, but the one name that jumps to my head is William Shakespeare.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
That's a good
beyond
one.
that, like how many people do we even, other than somebody's in a history book, do we even
Yeah.
know what they did? And then
Yeah.
somebody I just interviewed today said, you know, like he gave the example of like JP Morgan. Like most
Oh,
people don't
yeah.
know what the name is. Even
Yeah.
though that
Gosh,
was,
that is so true.
and then he
But you
said,
know what though, Corey, my 12-year-old daughter like doesn't know. I'll mention a band like, I don't know, AC/DC, and she's like, who's that? I don't know, and that's kind of a random example, but I think it illustrates the point. And I also feel like it does speak to this idea that, Andy Warhol coined back in the late 60s, early 70s, where he talked about in the future, everyone will be famous for 15 minutes, right? And we talk about your 15 minutes of fame, your 15 seconds of fame, but everybody has that platform now. And so I think that there are so many of us that are just focused on ourselves and the here and the now, that we're not really looking backwards anymore. I think that the goal is so focused on the future because of what is becoming possible with technological advances, medical advances, like you name it, that I feel like we're far less invested in the past. Now, I don't know if that's a wise thing or not. The past can teach us a lot of things about a lot of things, but I do have to just kind of get curious to this idea and wonder if that's really what's taking away this idea or this impact of legacy and making us focus more on the future.
I feel like you're right, and I also feel there's the idea that everything is so, I don't know if the word's fleeting is the right word, but everything's so like,
Oh, good.
it's big now,
Yeah.
it's not tomorrow. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
there's just stories of like, just a weird random example, but like you think the Will Smith slap, like I don't
Sure.
even hear anybody talk about it at all now, and it's
Right?
been a few months or whatever, like 6 months or whatever or
Yeah.
less. And what I'm
Yeah.
getting at is that everything, even big stories, are replaced the next day by a bigger story. So how are we going to remember? This is how I'm thinking of it. How are we going to remember
Yeah.
a 400-year ago Shakespeare whenever we barely remember this big news story that happened 4 days ago?
Yeah.
I think
God, that is such a good point.
the pace
So
is
that is a great
changing
way.
so quickly.
Yes, that is such a great way to look at it. But you know what I do, Corey? And do you do this? Have you ever done this? I write my eulogy. Like I've written my eulogy. I read it every morning. And it's funny because sometimes I tell people that and they say, okay, well, you should see somebody about that. But here's what I'm trying to do. Like I'm very much trying to live an intentional life. I very much am trying to show up every day with intention and focused on doing the work in the world and helping the people that I know I can help and that I know I can serve. And so I want to make sure that I stay on track. And my eulogy is a constant reminder of that, right? It's like the memento mori, like remember you will die. Like and I don't say that to be morbid or any of those things. I do it as a way to stay focused in the present, in the here and now, to not waste any of these fleeting moments, because I know that one day they will end. And so one day when that time comes, I have my eulogy that drives me, because I ideally, when I get to the end of my life, that eulogy will still be pertinent at the time and they'll be able to read that, and I will feel like I have accomplished what I set out to accomplish. A few months ago, I heard this definition of hell, and it was, the definition of hell is when the you became at the end of your life meets the you could have become. And so I think it's really interesting to think about, maybe not in terms of legacy, but in terms of, just being present in the here and now.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that popped out to me there, Cynthia. One is a great Les Brown story. I don't know if you heard Les Brown ever tell the story about the graveyard.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a good
that's
one.
what you think of that, like
Yes.
that it's the richest place on earth because of all the ghosts of what you didn't do, what you didn't achieve, or basically you brought that with you to the grave.
Yeah.
And so I think that's so powerful. One thing you also mentioned, which I thought, and this is just a side note, but it was really humorous to me, is we did a mastermind in Miami like 2.5 weeks ago. We brought in 3 really big name speakers. One was a Grammy-winning producer. One was a former UFC guy. And I won't say what the third one was because I'm going to say it shocked me that she didn't know. But I'll just say a big name influencer. And if people want to do their digging, they could just go and find out the event we did and who was one of the speakers. But because I don't know if this was on air, it wouldn't bother her. And I don't know if it was on air when we did this or if it was off air, and I can't remember. But I told her that we were in Florida, and I'm not a huge metal fan from the 80s metal and stuff, but Metallica was one of the bands when I was younger that was big. And so they were doing a show in a place called Hollywood, Florida, and it's the only show. There was no tour. What it was is their first producer and his wife, they had passed away, so they were doing a fundraiser for them at the Hard Rock, you get a chance to see Metallica doing one show that nobody will ever experience other than the people that were in the room. So I was like, I'm going to this. And so I told her, I'm going to see Metallica. She goes, I've heard of that. Is that like a stadium? Is Metallica, is that a stadium? And I was so taken, Cynthia, that I was like, what do you mean? Am I going to the stadium? And she said, no, like that thing you said. And I said, Metallica? She goes, yeah, I've heard of it. God. And I said, well, they're a pretty big metal band. She goes, oh, it's music? And it was just like, but the wild part is she's a musician, but now she's 30. So, it's like, but still, like, I'm thinking Metallica, like, no, really? Like, but that's
does this just mean we're getting old, Corey? Like, I don't
know. For me, it does. I'll say not you, but it does for me. But it also, goes back to that legacy point you made. It's a full circle that whenever somebody doesn't even know who Metallica is,
seriously,
my grandmother knows who Metallica is. And she's never listened to metal. She just knows that's a band. And so this 30-year-old, I said it, and she's like, sorry.
You know what? I pick up things every day, or I get online every day, Corey, and I see people that are in the news, and everyone is very concerned with the life that they're living, and I have no idea who these people are. So, so maybe I'm just stuck in the past because I definitely know who Metallica is. But I don't know. I mean, I just feel like there is so much information these days, and there's only so much attention. And so we have to focus on the things that are important to us. My 12-year-old daughter, Metallica is not important to her, right? But these YouTube stars, and I don't even know their names, but they're radically successful, and God love them. They're doing the Lord's work out there. It's fantastic. But she knows them, right? And so I think it's just a matter of intention as well as attention in this very noisy, crowded world that we all live in these days.
You're so right. And I'll say on this one, before I move on to a different direction, because like I said, we could talk about just one area for an hour. But I will say my son, to your point about the YouTubers, to my son, when I said to him, he said something about spy ninjas. And I said, what's a spy ninja? And he goes, you don't know who the spy ninjas are? And he's 5. And he's like, you don't know who the spy ninjas are? He goes, wow, my dad is not cool. And he's 5.
Wow.
And he's probably even learned that my dad is not cool from YouTube videos. He's, and that's the thing. I mean, it's easy to judge it, but I feel like our son is more intellectual from the stuff he's learning, at least for his age 5. I don't know if it's going to be the same if he's 12, but at 5, the stuff he's saying, I never would have thought of to put a weird perspective on it. He asked me, I know these are questions that 5-year-olds ask, but he asked me, how his old grampy got up to heaven. And anyway, so I was stuck. I was either he flew or he might have caught a plane. There might be a plane. I was just like, how do you explain this? But but what he followed up with, which is the part that I'm thinking, how did he think that through for a 5-year-old? So short version is my mother is his Mamie. My girlfriend's father is his papa. My girlfriend's mother is no longer with us, so he never met her, but her name is Nana. So he knows his Nana's in heaven, and he knows that's his mother's mother. And so he knows my grandfather, which is old Grampy in heaven. But what he did was he dissected and said, those are 3 people out of 4. And he said, where's your dad? And so my dad's not my life. So he said, where's your dad? And he lives that way. My dad lives somewhere 15 minutes from where I'm at right now. But it's just, he just wasn't really, he didn't know how to be a father. A great guy, how to be a father. Yeah. But my point is, my son said, where's your dad? And then when I said, well, he lives near blah, blah, he goes, why doesn't he come visit me then? And I said, well, it's just, he made a choice. And he goes, well, he made a bad one. But my point is, and he said, because I'm pretty cool, is what he said. But my point of that is for a 5-year-old to dissect and figure out there's one person missing out of the 4 grandparents.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have thought that way. And I feel like it's because he's watched so much stuff. He said to me yesterday, he goes, I'm going to get an Xbox 45 5th. And I said, I don't know what that is, buddy. I
I
know what an X-Buck is. But I don't know what a 45th is, but like he's 5. He shouldn't know these things. So, but I
Yeah.
mean, so on one hand, it's wild to think like how you can look at the bad of them watching videos and being pulled into that. But I
Sure.
think also at the same time, they can learn a lot from it too.
Oh, I agree. And I don't know if you want to go down this rocky road or not, but I do think that education is changing so much. I mean, Corey, like my daughter goes to very much of a nature school. They're out, rain, sleet, snow, shine. I mean, it's in Los Angeles, so it doesn't exactly snow a lot, but you get the idea. I mean, they're out on the land. And furthermore, they teach them social skills. They work together as a group. They learn how to communicate. Every afternoon, they sit down and do circle, and they talked about any issues or conflicts that came up during the day and how it made each other feel and how they can be more inclusive and all of these wonderful, wonderful topics. And somebody said to me the other day, they said, gosh, I wish I could go to Rain, my daughter's school. And I was like, yeah, me too. And then they said, do they even learn anything? Like, do they learn math and reading? And my answer, of course, was like, of course they do, but it is by no means the most important thing. And I started to ask myself, do I care? And the truth is, I don't. I don't. Now, do I want my daughter to learn how to read? Of course. And she's been reading since she was a tiny little thing. We've got that covered. Do I want her to know how to do basic math? Of course I do. Like, that's just basic life skills. But do I care that she memorizes and can evaluate the Pythagorean theorem? Not really. I don't care so much, or that she knows the formula for chemical equations. Not so much, because we carry around these computers in our pockets these days. Anything that she needs to know that's tangible information, she can find it. But when it comes to learning how to connect with another human being, how to consider someone else's feelings, how to understand what's going on in the world and how she might be a part of changing things, that's really what I care about. That is the value of a modern day education in my book, at least.
So I love that. And I know, I mean, I want to make sure I cover one other area before we jump into the main question I want to ask you.
Yeah, you lead, I'll follow.
But I was going to say, I didn't comment on one thing you said, and I think it was super important for somebody that maybe if they felt like we talked about it, but it was glossed over. I want to make sure people that catch this. One thing you said about the obituary, and you asked, do I do that? And so I've written my obituary. I think I've written it maybe twice in my life so far. But what I didn't do, and maybe I'll start now, was the reading it every day, the reviewing it. But what I will tell you, as a side note, something that well, two things. One, I've had people write their obituary during facilitations and have the biggest people, the people that kick up the biggest fuss are always the one that message me later and say, I'm on page 18 and I can't stop writing. But I will say, Robin Sharma, do you know that name? He wrote The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. So interviewing him one time, he told me something he does, which I find similar to that in a lot of ways. And he learned this, I think, from Warren Buffett. But he said that what he does is he reverse engineers his life in such a way that he pictured what he wanted to be at 80, all he wanted to achieve, everything else. And then he worked backwards and built a plan for what 5 things he would have to do every year until he's 80. Like, that's pretty detailed.
Wow, that is good.
And so
that is so good.
So I love that. And that's so what it made me think of when you said every day reviewing your obituary. That's what I thought of, is how he kind of reverse engineered it. But both of them, I think, are amazing tools, like inventory, doing an inventory.
Yeah, I mean, and that's really what it's about, right? So I have the people that I work with create something called an unapologetic success story. And so what that is it looks at what you want to create in your life. And we break that down into what I call primary objectives. So a primary objective might be your health, mentally, physically, spiritually. It might be your wealth. It might be your relationships, right? It could be all of the things that are a priority to you. And same thing, I look at like, where do you want to go and how long is it going to take you to get there? And there's something called goal setting to the now. I don't know if you've ever heard of this concept or not. It's in a book called The One Thing, which is one of the best books. Like I recommend it all the time when people ask me for book recommendations. And I've read so many books, Corey, we can't even get into that. That would take up all our time and then some. But this one helps you to just really focus and drill down on the one thing, like what is really important to you. And so once you see where you want to go, then you do goal setting to the now, which means if I want to be here in 20 years, then 10 years, I got to be doing this. In 5 years, I got to be doing this, which means this year, I got to be doing this, which means this month, I got to focus on this, which means this week, today, right now. I should be doing this thing. And it's just a really, again, intentional way of creating the life that you want, of becoming self-made, of creating the future that you want to step into. There's no room for guesswork. Like, I think sometimes we throw out these big dreams, these big goals, like this life that we want to create, and then we have no real idea of how we're going to get there, and you don't have to, don't get me wrong. I don't know this. I had no idea the steps that I was supposed to take to get to where I'm at today. I know where I'm going in the future, but I don't really know every step I'm going to take in order to get there. However, you got to take some action of some sort that moves you forward in the direction that you want to go, right? And so this is what this allows that to do. So I very much use this. Again, it's anchoring, it's intentional, and all of my students and clients who use it always see bigger results at the end of, say, the first year we work together than they've seen before, because they are consciously choosing in the moment what is the priority to get them where they eventually want to become.
So let me ask you, when you mentioned the one thing, first, well, I'll tell you a super duper quick story about the one thing. So yes,
Yeah.
I'm familiar with it. I have a copy here somewhere. And
I'm obsessed.
are you? So have you been on the show yet?
I haven't. No, I
Oh, you
should
need to-
though. I'm going to
So
call
here-
it Gary Keller.
Well, here's what I did actually to get on the show.